Now what we're going to be moving into is how to create nice looking clouds using Afterburn. So what I'm going to do now is just load up my particle flow view and create an empty flow just with a birth event and a position icon, and just link these two together. I'm just going to change some of the parameters. First of all, the birth I'm going to set to 0 frames, so it would emit all the particles in one go. And the amount of particles I'm going to set to be about 25. I'm going to rely on it being more large puffs than anything else, so I don't need as many particles. In the PF source node, I'm just going to set the viewport percent to 100%, so that way I can see all of my particles in the view. Now I'm just going to create a spotlight and just drag it down to the viewport here and just position it up in the sky a little bit, and probably like right behind the actual cloud. Now the other thing I want to do after I create a camera is I just want to change by selecting my particle system, the icon type to be a box, so that way it's three-dimensional, and just change the width, length and height a little bit to match more what I'm after. I will need to change these parameters a little bit afterwards, but for the time being that's matching roughly what I want to achieve. Now under the spotlight I just want to change shadows to on and to AB ray trace shadow, and I'm just going to set the multiplier to about 1.3, so that way it's a little bit brighter. Going to the rendering menu, I'm just going to load up environment and click add and choose Afterburn from the list. Once our Afterburn's loaded, I just want to select and add my particle system to the list and click on show on viewport. We can see now all the Afterburn spheres representing the size of them. Right now they're not big enough, so I'm going to bring up the size to match more what I'm after. So setting it roughly to about 20 in size, I'm just going to go down to density fall off by radius and set the cubic, and set the noise size to be about 15 with noise levels to about 6. Lastly, I just want to go up the top a little bit more and change the ambient color by right clicking the keyless mode. I'm going to change it to be more of a darker kind of cloud that I'm after. I want to set up a kind of nighttime scene more than anything. And lastly, I just want to we'll just work out the color values: 87, 102, and 129, and we'll just put these in. And so that way the sky color is set to the same as the ambient color. And lastly, I'm just going to add my light into the list, and we'll just render out a quick frame and we'll see how it looks. One thing we'll need to do right away is set self-shadowing to on, and hopefully this will give it a bit more of the atmosphere that we're after. Without changing too many parameters, we're already getting more of the kind of look that we're after right away. We can see we're getting more of kind of a rim light from the moonlight or whatever we want to set it up to be, and it's just a matter of changing these values to represent more the kind of look and feel that we want. One thing we can do first of all is set the light scattering to Rayleigh, and this just is better for clouds. Basically it just gives us this kind of different illumination based upon the camera angle. And I'm just going to set the sky light to be a little bit darker than the shadow light, and I'm just going to change the fall off to be a little bit higher, and lastly the density down a little bit. Now this is giving us more the softer look that I'm trying to achieve. One thing to keep in mind with the way that shadows work on clouds is the fact that you're never really going to get 100% black shadow, because what happens is a cloud is not 100% opaque like a polygon, and it's not transparent either. So when a light penetrates through, it tends to bounce around inside the volume, illuminating it more and more, but decaying off as it does. So what it eventually becomes is it's a very soft volume in terms of density, but it tends to be quite illuminated because the light is absorbed inside of it. So that gives us a more brighter look than anything else because of that. Now I just want to change a few values here. One is I want to change my icon type just to be a little bit more spread out. And just to speed up rendering, I'm going to scroll up the top and set step size to about 2, just for the time being. And I might try and play with Lambert being on just to see how we look. Lambert's giving me some interesting results. In this case, it's probably not what we're after, just because we still want to have that brighter illumination. But ideally, it's kind of looking more and more like the kind of look that we want. What we might do is set the turbulence to be an FBM turbulence now, just that way we can get a little bit more detail in there. Scrolling down, we're going to just go down to type and change this to FBM turbulence, and here we can just up the detail to about 2.25. We'll also set the density up to 5 just for the time being to see if we can speed up our renders. Obviously the density right now is quite high, but we can bring that back down when it comes to rendering time. But this allows us to actually just visualize more how we want our actual effect to look. First of all, bring my scale up a little bit, but I'll bring regularity down. This just makes the spheres bigger, but at the same time breaking up the pattern a lot more, just giving us a better result. And I'm just adjusting the dimensions slightly so that way we get this more three-dimensional feel. And I'm just going to bring the step size down slightly as we've got the density up. Ideally, this kind of feel is quite simple in terms of the look, but it's giving us a very nice example in terms of the overall feel to it. And I might just adjust a few parameters, such as I might play with the particle count slightly, just adding 10 more particles in. But this is pretty much getting there in terms of how it looks overall. The one thing I might do now is just add in some layered fog, just to kind of give it more of that atmosphere and make it less flat. But on top of that, there's like a few things we can do with lighting and so forth, but ideally this is the kind of like over the top cloud layer that I want to achieve. So we can kind of have the cloud layered below the camera and the camera kind of floats softly over it. Also keep in mind the fact that these are volumetric, which means that they actually have volume inside of the actual shell that we have here, which means we can actually fly the camera right through the cloud if we actually wanted to try and do. What I'll do is just add an afterburn volume fog, and we'll just set the color to be the same as the sky color. So just grabbing the swatch and just going to drag it down and choose copy, and set the density to be about 2 and exponential. This dulls down the look quite a lot, so what we can do is minimize our atmospheric window and just go to the create panel, helpers, atmospheric apparatus, and create a sphere gizmo, and we'll just position it so it covers the camera and everything else in the scene. And what we do then is we just add this into our gizmo. Also set the step size to about 15 for the time being, so that way it renders a little bit quicker, and the density to about 15. And lastly, our size to about 75. This just allows us to give it more of a patchy feel to the overall look of it, so that way some areas are lighter and some aren't. But it also kind of conveys more depth through just giving it more of an overall kind of fog, which is reading through the Z depth. Lastly, assuming that you're happy with the overall feel of your clouds, there's a few things we can do to just give it more of the feel that we want. We can either adjust the brightness of this and just make it more of an overall kind of brighter feel. Obviously not wanting to make it too bright, as it kind of breaks up the pattern too much, but the basic idea is that you can try and give it more contrast and more depth. You can also try and use a actual afterburn fog, which will even give a slightly different feel to everything. As you can see, the color is quite bright, but you can kind of see the way it blends everything together, giving it more depth. Or in fact, you can look into the volumetric fog tutorial in one of the other chapters, which will probably be the most optimal way to give kind of patchy layered fog, to give it more kind of depth, as if you got thin patches of cloud which you're flying through. But ideally, what we can do now is just animate our camera, just shifting through the scene here. So I'm just going to get my target and shift it forward a little bit, and just as a quick animation, just animate the camera shifting through some cloud here. And just rendering out a low resolution frame at one of the later frames of animation. We can see basically how we can progress through the animation, and if we lower the camera down just a slight bit, we'll be able to hopefully fly through some patches of cloud. As we can see, we can start to kind of progress through and hit some of the cloud here, and the basic idea is just to kind of give yourself a bit of a kind of fly through, so that way the camera can kind of just feel as if it's pushing through the cloud and taking advantage of the volumetric effect that we're setting up. And lastly, if we want, we can just play with the density, just to give quicker rendering times and so forth. I've just brought the step size up to around 2, which basically just means that we're getting quicker rendering times, but then we can bring the density right down. And this just gives us more of a softer feel to our cloud without having to have too steep a rendering time. This concludes the end of this tutorial on making clouds, and if you just want to render out your animation and maybe even go the extra step of making other patches of cloud in the sky, just in the background here, and just like patches of really thin cloud and so forth, and just see how your end result looks. Here's our final rendering result of our clouds, and what I've done is I've gone the extra step of just creating a kind of light mist, kind of just to give it more depth as you're flying through the clouds, just not to make it such a solid kind of just big, thick, dense area of cloud. And I've saved this out as Clouds My version, which obviously if you want you can load up and just have a look into it. What I've done is I've actually gone through the fog mist tutorial that I've already covered, and just kind of use that technique here just to kind of give it that extra bit of depth throughout the whole entire feel of it. But ideally we can see our clouds here look fantastic, and they self-shadow. They render quite quickly given the kind of immense detail that we're actually giving it. And if we want, we can play with the step size even more just to avoid any artifacting that might be happening, although right now this looks quite great and would even hold up probably in film. So it's just a matter of going now and either putting some in the background or whatever you like to kind of give that more personal feel to your scene.